Programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
So where does the risk of a banking crisis rank when it comes to the stock market? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. I do have a line open if you'd like to call in. The number is 1-877-913-5357. 1-877-913-5357. You can also go to the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Send a question in, and I will get that taken care of for you. That's all at the website, www.prudentmoney.com. 1-877-913-5357. Well, it's a pretty lazy day today. I guess that's kind of how I would describe it on Wall Street. Not much going on. I think the markets are just waiting to see how the latest economic numbers come out. NASDAQ actually didn't have such a hot day. They were down 1%, but the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones were just about even for the day. But we do have the latest batch of earnings reports coming out, and that will tell us exactly how corporate America, what they think is coming down the pike, how they feel things are going to play out by maybe the warnings that they give, maybe the guidance that they give, and basically what their numbers look like. You know, it's interesting because dating back to after COVID, as far as the big COVID drop, excuse me, which was in March of 2000, March and April, I haven't really come across a earnings reporting season like we're about to have. And remember, earnings reporting is basically XYZ company coming out and saying, we made this amount of money and we did this well with revenue. These are our financials for the quarter and for maybe the last 12 months. And so this is going to match up with what Wall Street says, yeah, that's what we expected, and the stock price maybe goes up, or they come in way below what was expected, and the stock gets hammered. And, you know, it's interesting to me. I mean, it isn't just because there's a lot of, it seems like more and more manipulation going on. But the earnings reports have not really been that bad. Maybe starting with this one, we'll start to see the reflection of what the real economy looks like versus what Wall Street wants you to see. So that I think there's a lot that's weighing on the market as far as what's coming down the pike and how things look. So we'll see how tomorrow goes. I'll talk about unemployment a little bit later on, but on Friday we do have a big, and every unemployment number is, of course, a big number. But we'll have an unemployment number that will come out on Friday. Now, what's interesting is Wall Street is expecting a very large number of jobs being created. And with all the layoffs happening and all of the other numbers that are saying, hey, there's problems in the job market, which we'll talk about, I cannot imagine that this number will come out that great. Now, of course, I said this a couple of months ago when they were predicting, something like 300,000 jobs, and over 500,000 were reported created. So we'll see what the real number, or what they call the real number, that comes out on Friday. But the market is closed in observation of Good Friday. So there won't be any any market response to it. So I guess if you're going to deliver bad news, having the market close is probably a good thing. But we'll see what happens. 1-877-913-5357. Yesterday, I started a list of what I felt like was the problems, the risks that face the stock market, that face your retirement money today. You know, when I'm talking about the stock market, I always think of it as your retirement money, what you have invested, because most people, their retirement accounts go the same direction as the direction of the stock market. So what I was talking about yesterday was that I used to, haven't done one since COVID started, but I used to do a January investor workshop. And I would start off the workshop with, this is what I think are they're usually 10 to 12, 13 different risks that really haven't appeared yet, but are starting to show up. And this is what I think could if there's anything that could throw a problem in the markets, this is what it is. Like I said, it's usually 12, 13 different things to consider. This time I went through and I decided, well, I'm going to write this as if it were January. And there were really 7 to 8 different risks that, in fact, it wouldn't be as January because I include the banking crisis in there. But there would be 7 to 8 risks that we really have to monitor. The first one was, I talked about interest rates and the fact that, when interest rates go up, like they've been going up, bond prices go down. And I still feel like that we have yet to see it, but I still feel like that where the real problems could be manifesting themselves would be in the bond market. Because once again, interest rates go up, it's an inverse relationship, bond prices go down. And I don't think that we've really started to feel the full effects of interest rates. So and of course, remember, the reason that the Federal Reserve Board is raising interest rates is to fight inflation. So that's the first one. The second one we talked about was, of course, the biggest one of all, maybe, which is inflation. And kind of that, what I call stagnant inflation, where at these levels, they're not really moving down. Now, I know the government is leading everybody to believe that the inflation is getting better. I'll say it once again, being a consumer, like you're a consumer, I don't feel like they're getting any better. But that's what the government certainly does want us all to believe. And then yesterday, it was either yesterday or the day before, a number of oil-producing countries decided to cut production. And I think we'll see an inflation where energy prices have and the price of oil have really come down and haven't really been a pressure on the inflation rate. I think that we're going to start to see a cut in production feed its way into the inflation rate, and we'll start to see the inflation rate go up, which would be something Wall Street's not expecting. Keep an eye on that. The third one was a recession, and of course, this is Jim Rickards on the program 4 or 5 weeks ago. And I said, Jim, it seems like everyone is looking for a recession. And any time that you have everybody that agrees that something's going to happen, it usually doesn't happen. It's called or I call it the crowd theory. But he said there's no question that everybody's looking for a recession, but they're all looking for a mild recession, and he predicts that we'll have a much worse than a much deeper recession. So we'll see. Number 4, the Federal Reserve Board reignites the bubble, the investment bubble environment. Now, what happens when the Fed and the government start to go into emergency measures, the market's falling, the economy's falling, and they jump in there to try to save it, it's generally at that time when the market has fallen so much that it just can't fall anymore. And that's the last thing that I would do, how I would describe this market. This market's got a whole lot more to go if indeed it chooses to fall. So I believe you still have people very optimistic about stocks, and you would start right back into that bubble environment and money pouring into the stock market. And you're probably saying, well, wouldn't that be a good thing? Not in the long run it wouldn't, because at some point, the way markets work, you have to have a bear market and go through a completion of a bear market, which we've even come close yet to doing, to clean out all the toxic waste that builds up in the market. Then you can have a meaningful bull market start. So my concern is that the Federal Reserve Board, because of what they're calling the banking crisis, they don't want to do anything to potentially feed that fire. And the Federal Reserve Board, by raising interest rates, could do that. So the last time that they met, they talked about raising it a couple more times, which would be it. So we'll talk about that on the other side of the break. 1-877-913-5357. This is Bob Brooks. Stick around. I'll be right back.
The Word for Today is excited to announce the new official online home for the ministry of Pastor Chuck Smith and Kay Smith, pastorchuck.org. At pastorchuck.org, you'll have instant access to thousands of hours of verse-by-verse teaching by Pastor Chuck Smith from Genesis through Revelation, and full access to special messages on subjects such as prophecy and much, much more. Also at pastorchuck.org, a full library of great teachings by Kay Smith, and a section where you can read some of Pastor Chuck's books online, all free of charge. So visit the new official online home of the Word for Today and the ministry of Pastor Chuck and Kay Smith, pastorchuck.org.
Dynamic, practical, life-changing.
There's no point in going to church and not letting the Christ who gave birth to the church on the day of Pentecost change your life.
Join us each day as Pastor Paul Shepherd applies the timeless truth of Scripture to everyday life. It's Destined for Victory on this great station.
Weekday afternoons at 3:30 here on Bible School Radio, KDKR.
This week on Through the Bible, we're in the Old Testament. We'll finish up our study of Ezra and move on to Nehemiah. As Dr. McGee tells us, Nehemiah is a companion book of Ezra. In the Hebrew canon, they're one book. So come along as we study them together and learn important lessons from these great men of God.
Listen daily, 6:30 p.m. on Bible School Radio 91.3.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. 1-877-913-5357. I do have a line open. Would love to hear from you today, whatever's on your mind. Talking about the list of risks that the market faces. Just talked a little bit about the Federal Reserve Board reigniting the investment bubble, which I can't even imagine what that'd be like, but we'll see. Number 5 is, of course, a global war of some type. The environment is certainly heating up. there's a lot of things taking place that could make that could end up being the result. But I think that Wall Street looks at it as something that's way off. In fact, I think one of the generals predicted that it would be something that happened in 2025. I was talking about this yesterday with someone, and they said, yeah, but if Trump got into office, I doubt Putin would try to start a war and get that stirred up. But you got to think of it this way, is that although that could be true, what could get started up, assuming that he were to get into office? There's a lot of things that they've got to take place. But someone that would, somebody that would, a president, call it Trump, call it whomever, that would take a war seriously and fight back. So I doubt our current president really would fit that role as a wartime leader. I don't know. So we'll see. A lot of different opinions about that. Then there is the banking crisis. Now here's what's interesting. The Federal Reserve, the Treasury Department, the White House jumped on this Silicon Valley Bank insolvency and Signature Bank insolvency just almost the minute that it happened. And I thought to myself, boy, they certainly do see something that we don't see. The more that I looked into it, the more that I read about it and researched it, it became very apparent that the problem that they see is a full-blown banking crisis. Now, you may be thinking, as I thought, the big banks are in good shape. They're probably overcapitalized. There's probably, according to one report, there's 186 banks that are just had just as much risk to being insolvent as Silicon Valley Bank. So how do we get this full-blown banking crisis? And in talking about this last week or the week before, we talked about the fact that it wouldn't take much. It takes you talk about the California wildfires, and we have them. Someone throws a cigarette butt out of a window and starts a massive fire that wipes out hundreds of thousands of homes and causes millions upon millions of dollars worth of damage. Just a cigarette butt. And if you think about it from a banking crisis standpoint, there's two aspects to this day and time that we've just never had before. And it all affects confidence, and it all affects the way people react. Is that if you had a problem with two or three banks at once, like you had a problem with a couple of banks, and you had people starting to move money out, and you can do it electronically, so it's not as if it's difficult to move money out. And keep in mind that banks are if you put $1 million in a bank, they don't necessarily have your $1 million. It's what's called a fractional reserve banking system, where banks can loan out a certain amount of the deposits that they have on their balance sheet, which could be they can loan out a certain amount of percentage of your money. So if everybody made a run for the bank, and I don't think people really realize that, but I think what ends up happening is you start to get a crisis starts to sweep across the country. People yanking money out of banks, out of big banks, out of small banks, out of medium-sized banks. And then you have social media just throwing gasoline on the fire. You could have a full-blown problem within a matter of I don't know if it's hours or days. Obviously never faced anything like this. So I think that's what they were seeing, and it was kind of a wake-up call to, hey, we've got to step in and squash this problem right away. But there's still a lot of respected voices in the banking community that are saying, hey, we still have a problem with banks, even though it's gotten quiet. And it got quiet because the Federal Reserve Board jumped in and said, okay, we're going to cover every single depositor, 100%. And I don't think that we stop to think about that, how drastic that was. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were telling me that their company had $1 million with Silicon Valley Bank. They were a tech company. And they got all their money back and out of there within 24, 48 hours. That wouldn't happen with an FDIC-covered banking crisis type situation and an insolvency. So that was drastic measures that were taken by the Federal Reserve Board, by the government, by the Treasury Department. And I don't think that we take a step back to really realize how drastic that was. And then there's always number 7, I would call it, what we don't see coming. It's always something that we don't anticipate. That's a byproduct from something that was done months ago, years ago, or whatever. And here is something that nobody's really talking about, which is commercial real estate. Now, we went through our lease came due a couple of months ago, so we went through the process of renegotiating a lease, and we went through the process of looking around. And I was surprised, of course, my realtor told me this ahead of time, but I was surprised at how expensive rent really was. When you look in the parking lots and you hear most of your friends are working from home, and you've got not empty buildings, but you've got buildings that, 25% of the people or 75% of the people aren't even in the office. And you've got these mega buildings everywhere. And so I came across this note. More than 50%, so this is 2 problems coming up. More than 50% of the $2.9 trillion in commercial mortgages, so loans against commercial buildings, will need to be renegotiated in the next 24 months when new lending rates are likely to be up by 3.5% to 4.5%. So think about this. Assuming interest rates are at this level or above, and you have all these notes coming due, and then you have the second problem where, a second problem and a third problem. The second problem is regional banks accounted for 70 to 80% of all new loan originations in the past cycle. So you've got maybe defaulted loans. And the third problem is that you have leases coming due that these big corporations are downsizing. And so the revenue of these big buildings goes way down. You have loan mortgages renegotiated at higher rates, which means the owners of those buildings are not only their expense level went up, but their revenue model is going down. So you wonder, what kind of foreclosure situation could this be? And What kind of effects on the economy do we see that are kind of unintended reactions? So I would say there's a hefty list still out there, even though things just seem very quiet, just even though that it seems like, the government will come in and bail everybody out. I don't know. I don't think it's that easy. Just know your risk level and be comfortable with it, and that's the best way to go. This is Bob Brooks. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.